Hasbro's toy line for the World Wrestling Federation lasted from 1990 to 1994 and spanned over 11 series. In those 11 series, we saw individual figures, mail-aways and tag team sets. This line was massively popular in its early days and kind of petered out towards the end, a bit like the actual World Wrestling Federation product itself at the time. But even to this day, this is one of my favourite toy lines ever, if not the favourite. And in the decades that have passed, the popularity has soared and there's still very much a huge community for these figures, whether it be collecting, trading, customising. These things are still very much beloved. They've also seen a resurgence in recent years with Mattel doing their retro line of figures. Now these figures divided the community. I myself love them. Yes, they aren't perfect replicas of what we had in the 90s, but who would have thought that in 2019 we would have been getting anything resembling these? I mean, I'm not going to knock that. We got 50 odd figures that I just absolutely adore. And even more recently, we have seen UK toy company Cella Toys come out with their own line dedicated to paying tribute to this toy line. They have done Nick Aldis, and they currently have pre-orders up for the Blue Meanie and Josh Chernoff and All Ego Ethan Page. Overseas, in the States, we have Zombie Sailor Toys, who announced that he's also thrown his hat into the ring and he's coming out with his own line of figures as well, and he's got some incredible signees. Now I'm not sure how easy these are going to be to get in the UK, probably not very, so I'm going to be a little bit on the fence about these until I see prices and ease of collecting. So I mentioned that there was tag team sets back in the 90s, and in 1991 we saw a Toys R Us advert that featured some upcoming tag team releases, and right there outside the ring is the Rhythm and Blues, which is a tag team consisting of the Honky Tonk Man and Greg the Hammer Valentine. This was a new gimmick to Greg Valentine. Apparently he was not overly pleased about having to dye his hair black, and it was also a very short-lived tag team. So when Series 2 did drop, we didn't get a Rhythm and Blues tag team. We got the Honky Tonk Man by himself. Now this is before the days where every single thing a toy company does is leaked onto the internet and debated on forums and the such like. So back in those days, you saw this advert for the Rhythm and Blues, you kind of expected him to turn up in the shop one day and there was no Greg Valentine, there was only Honky Tonk Man. And it wasn't until Series 3 that we eventually got Greg the Hammer Valentine. And he isn't the same Greg the Hammer Valentine that we saw in that advert. The jacket is gone, his hair is back to his trademark blonde, and he's got the shin pad. So what happened to that Rhythm and Blues Greg the Hammer Valentine? Well, wrestling is basically one big soap opera, and characters come and go and gimmicks change. The tag team was disbanded, and Honky Tonk Man and Greg Valentine both went on to be singles wrestlers. So Hasbro at the time must have made the decision to not bother with the tag team and just put Honky Tonk Man out and focus on this later. And that's where this gets interesting, because the fan base for prototype stuff for Hasbro is rabid. It's crazy. It's sadly nothing that I personally can take part in because I just don't have that kind of money. But a few years back, the prototype of this figure surfaced, and there are 3 known worldwide. And one of them is in the hands of a collector in Wales, and the other one belongs to professional wrestler and fellow toy collector Matt Cardona, better known as Zack Ryder from his days with the WWE. And I believe Matt Cardona has that exact one that was in the Toys R Us advert, and that's probably the best looking version of it. The paint is immaculate, and it very much is the holy grail of this line. I would almost liken it to the Rocket Fire and Boba Fett if you wanted to put it into bigger, more famous toy related terms. Not as valuable clearly, but this thing went for serious money. And only a couple of years ago there was also a grey resin prototype found, along with Macho King Randy Savage, the Honky Tonk Man who Greg was meant to share a tag team pack with, and Tugboat. Now I was recently looking at this Tugboat, and it's such a shame that none of these parts were ever used again. I think maybe the left arm is the same left arm as Earthquake, Typhoon, Bam Bam Bigelow, but the legs and the torso weren't ever used for anybody else. And it's mad to think that a company can put so much time and effort into creating a figure just for it never to see the light of day. But that harkens back to wrestling and characters changing, and Tugboat was repackaged as Typhoon and put into a tag team with Earthquake, so it does make sense to scrap figures that aren't on TV anymore, but it just does feel like a bit of a shame. And that great prototype is what I wanted a little version of myself. This is made by my good mate Johnny. He also made the steel cages for the Retro and Hasbro rings. It was so cool to see them sell out almost instantly. He's done 2 batches now, and the 3rd batch is on the way. Johnny's got himself a resin printer now, And whenever I hear the word resin, I instantly think of resin prototype toys. Just the way my crazy mind works, and I was like, oh man, you should totally print a tugboat and a Greg Valentine. And sadly, the files don't exist for a tugboat, but they do exist for Rhythm and Blues Greg Valentine. Yes, this isn't an original. I'm never ever ever going to get an original. I just wanted to pay homage to that and have a replica of that, just to have on a shelf, not to try and trick anybody into thinking that this is the real deal. Just my own little version of Hasbro figure history. And even though this is just something printed out of thin air, which I still find unbelievable. I don't know whether it's just my age and the fact that I'm like baffled by the wizardry of modern technology, but the fact that 3D printers exist still just makes my mind explode. This was made by my friend for me, and it's like somewhat articulated. It's quite crude, but it feels like heavy and just strange, and it looks like it's made out of clay, and it looks like that prestigious holy grail of collecting, but it isn't. But it doesn't need to be. I'm your average Joe toy collector. I just wanted a representation of something so revered within the community, and I feel I've got that with this. This thing's cool. The details are a little soft, but that's down to the scan that's available. But when you consider that there's only 3 of these worldwide, the fact that a scan of this even exists is just mental. So the Rhythm and Blues tag team never saw the light of day, and this is as close as I personally am ever going to get. I mean, if I wanted to, I could maybe try and paint this, but if my history of toy painting is anything to go by, that's just not going to happen. But I like that I've got a replica of the newest surfaced version of this. Like, loads of people do customs of this painted, and there's only 2 people that I've seen that do a good job of it. A lot of them are pretty poor, and I didn't want a pretty poor one. I wanted the best replica of this that I could afford, that I could get my hands on, and I think I've got that thanks to Johnny over at Retro Steel Cage on Instagram. I shall leave a link in the bottom to him, and I'm going to try and convince him to also make more of these and sell more of these, because I think there's a market for this, because I'm not the only person who thinks the way I do about this. Something so massively scarce, I think deserves to have a bit more of an accessible release, because while this may not be the real McCoy, it's a real physical item that I can hold and put on my shelf, and that's real enough for me. I just think it's lovely that a toy line that ended decades ago still has life being breathed into it by Cella Toys, by Zombie Sailor Toys, by every customizer out there, by my friend Johnny, by making me this. I don't want this toy line to ever go away, and thanks to stuff like this and people like this, I don't think it ever will. And I just love that so much.